Nobody cares about you the way you keep hoping they will. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as a wake-up call, because a lot of your stress right now isn't coming from people being cruel. It's coming from you waiting for someone to notice you're not okay, waiting for a message, waiting for an apology, waiting for them to finally get it. And while you're waiting, your life is on pause. Most people are not studying you. They're not tracking your mood. They're not replaying your words at night. They're trying to survive their own day, their own bills, their own anxiety, their own relationships, their own image. Even the ones who love you can be emotionally unavailable, not because they hate you, because they're full. So when you take everything personally, every silence, every delay, every cold tone, you end up doing the worst trade possible. You trade your peace for their attention. You start explaining yourself too much. You start chasing clarity from people who don't even know how to be clear with themselves. You start performing like you're being watched when nobody's actually watching. And that's the truth that sets you free. When you accept that you're not the center of everyone's mind, you stop living like you're on trial. You stop trying to manage every opinion. You stop letting your mood depend on reactions you can't control, and you start doing the only thing that works long-term. You bring your focus back to yourself. Because the world doesn't respond to hidden pain. It responds to visible strength. People don't sit down and analyze your reasons. They notice your standards, your discipline, your boundaries, your results. They notice when you stop begging to be chosen and start choosing yourself. If you've been tired of caring more than people care back, if you've been tired of overthinking, waiting, chasing closure, this episode is for you. Subscribe to the channel. And now let's start at the foundation, because everything changes the moment you accept this first truth. No one is coming to rescue you. No one is coming to rescue you. And I know that sentence can hit like a punch, because part of you still wants to believe that if you just hold on a little longer, someone will finally show up in the exact way you needed, at the exact moment you needed it, and they'll understand without you explaining. They'll stay without you begging. They'll choose you without you proving anything. But life doesn't work like that, and the longer you wait for it, the more you quietly hand your future over to chance. Most people don't realize they're waiting. They think they're being patient, being loyal, being a good person. But underneath that story, there's a hidden deal they keep making with the world. I'll stay stuck today, because maybe tomorrow someone will save me from the pain of changing. Maybe someone will give me the motivation. Maybe someone will give me the opportunity. Maybe someone will give me the apology that finally lets me breathe again. Maybe someone will come back and make it right. And without noticing, you start living with your hands stretched out, not for money, but for relief. Here's what that does to you. It turns you into someone who reacts instead of builds. Your mood rises and falls based on what people do. Your confidence depends on whether you're chosen, replied to, noticed, invited, validated. And because you want to feel safe, you start adjusting yourself. You become easier, quieter, more convenient. You over-explain. You tolerate what you shouldn't tolerate. You delay the hard decisions. You keep doors open that should be closed, because closing them would force you to accept the truth. If nobody comes, it's on you. That's not cruel, that's power. Because the moment you accept no one is coming, you stop wasting energy on hope that has no plan. You stop waiting for a mood to save you. You stop waiting for perfect timing. You stop waiting for people to understand your boundaries before you set them. You stop waiting for confidence to arrive before you take action. You stop waiting for someone to give you permission to become the version of you that you already know you need to become. And then you start moving differently. You start doing the boring things that change your life. You start sleeping like you respect yourself. You start training your body even when nobody notices. You start working when you don't feel inspired. You start cutting off what drains you, even if it makes you look mean. You start building skills, stacking wins, saving money, cleaning your environment, protecting your mind. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because you finally understand something simple. The rescue you wanted was always supposed to become your discipline. And I want to be very clear here, because this point can be misunderstood. This isn't telling you to isolate. It's not telling you to never ask for help. Ask for help. Use mentors. Use therapy. Use friends. Use community. That's human. But don't confuse support with rescue. Support helps you walk. Rescue carries you while you stay the same. And the truth is, nobody can carry you forever. Even the people who love you have limits. Even the people who promise will disappoint you sometimes. Even the best relationships can't replace self-leadership. So the real shift is this. You stop expecting life to be fair, and you start becoming capable. You stop demanding that people treat you better, and you start treating yourself better. You stop begging the world for a softer reality, and you start becoming stronger than the reality you have. Because when you build yourself from the inside, something strange happens. You become harder to manipulate, harder to shake. Rejection stops feeling like a verdict. Silence stops feeling like abandonment. You don't spiral as easily because your stability isn't sitting in someone else's hands. No one is coming to rescue you. So you rescue yourself, quietly, daily, without drama, until your life starts reflecting the work you've been doing when nobody was watching. And once that becomes real, you'll never go back to waiting. People are too busy with their own lives. That's the part your emotions don't want to accept, because your emotions don't care about logic, they care about meaning. And when someone doesn't text back, or doesn't check in, or doesn't notice you pulling away, your mind doesn't automatically translate that into "they're busy." It translates it into something harsher. "I don't matter. I'm not important. I'm easy to forget." And then you start building a whole story around a small moment. And you suffer more from the story than from the moment itself. But if you step back and look at people honestly, most of them are overwhelmed. They wake up already behind. They carry stress they don't talk about. They're trying to look stable while they feel unstable. They're trying to keep relationships alive while they can barely keep themselves together. And even the people who seem confident, who seem social, who seem always good, they're managing an internal mess you can't see. So when you expect consistent attention from people, you're often expecting something they can't give. Not because they're monsters, because they're human. Think about how often you've been distracted and didn't reply to someone right away. How often you've read a message, felt tired, and thought, "I'll respond later," and then later became never. How often you've cared about someone but still didn't have the energy to show it in the perfect way. You weren't trying to hurt them, you were just full. And that's exactly what's happening on the other side of many of your disappointments. This matters because it changes how you interpret life. When you believe people are always thinking about you, you live tense, you live self-conscious, you replay conversations, you inspect your tone, you overcorrect your personality. You wonder how you looked, how you sounded, if you were too much, if you were not enough. You start living like your identity is being graded. But once you accept that most people are mainly thinking about themselves, a weight drops. Not in a sad way, in a clean way. You stop taking everything personally. You stop treating silence as a verdict. You stop trying to control impressions that were never fully under your control anyway. And you start seeing social life for what it is: Everyone is the main character in their own head. That doesn't mean nobody will ever care. It means you can't build your self-worth on being remembered, included, chosen, or constantly checked on, because that foundation depends on how stressed, busy, and emotionally capable other people are in a given week. That's unstable ground. And if your peace is sitting on unstable ground, you'll feel anxious even on good days, because you'll always be waiting for the ground to shift. So here's the practical shift. Instead of asking, "Why don't they care about me?" ask, "Why am I making my emotional stability depend on their attention?" Instead of chasing people for reassurance, build routines that reassure you from the inside. Instead of watching who's viewing you, liking you, responding to you, invite yourself back into your own life. Put your attention into things that can actually carry you: your health, your work, your habits, your standards, your environment, the way you speak to yourself when nobody is around. Because when you stop demanding that busy people carry your emotions, you become lighter. And when you become lighter, you also become clearer. You can see who genuinely shows up, not because you forced it, but because they choose it. You can stop investing in relationships that only exist when you're entertaining, useful, available, or easy. And you can stop doing something that quietly destroys your self-respect: performing. A lot of people don't live their life. They present their life. They post it like they're managing a brand. They speak like they're being recorded. They move like they're being judged. But there's no audience. Not really. There's just a bunch of tired humans scrolling between their own worries. So, if you've been overthinking how you're perceived, if you've been feeling watched, judged, evaluated, I want you to hear this plainly. People are not thinking about you that much. They're thinking about themselves. And that is good news, because it means you're free to stop trying to be impressive and start being real. Your pain matters less to other people than you think. Not because you're dramatic, not because you're weak, not because what you're going through isn't real. It's real. It can be heavy. It can feel like you're carrying a full backpack of stones through a normal day while everyone else walks around with empty hands. But here's the truth that changes everything. Other people don't feel your pain from the inside. They only see the outside of it. And the outside is always quieter than the inside. You can be falling apart and still look fine. You can be grieving and still make jokes. You can be anxious and still show up on time. You can be exhausted and still say, "I'm good." And because you can do that, people assume you are good. They don't wake up with your thoughts. They don't get hit by your memories at random hours. They don't sit in your body when it tightens for no reason. They don't carry the backstory. They don't hear the inner dialogue that keeps repeating the same question: why me? So when you tell them a piece of it, they react. And then they move on. They might even care. They might even mean it when they say, "I'm here for you." But then their phone buzzes, their kid cries, their boss calls, their partner gets irritated, their own insecurity returns, and your pain becomes one item on their list, while it remains the entire landscape of your day. This is why seeking the perfect understanding from people can quietly destroy you, because you start needing them to respond in a certain way for you to feel okay. You need the right words, the right tone, the right timing, the right amount of attention, and if you don't get it, you feel abandoned, even if no one promised you anything. And look, I'm not saying don't share. Sharing matters. Asking for help matters. Support matters. But there's a difference between support and emotional outsourcing. Support is someone walking beside you while you still carry your own weight. Outsourcing is begging someone else to carry your inner world so you don't have to face it alone. That's the trap. When your pain gets big, you start searching for a witness, someone who sees it the way you see it, someone who reacts with the same intensity, someone who confirms that you're not crazy for feeling this much. And when they don't react the way you hoped, it feels like your pain got dismissed. But usually, it didn't get dismissed. It just didn't get adopted. Nobody can adopt your inner life for you, and once you accept that, you stop wasting energy on disappointment. You stop getting angry that people don't get it. You stop measuring love by how perfectly someone responds to your suffering. You stop turning your wounds into a court case where everyone has to agree on the verdict. There's a reason Stoic philosophy keeps coming back to one simple idea. Your life gets calmer when you stop demanding that the outside world fix the inside world. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." That line isn't about pretending pain doesn't exist. It's about refusing to hand your stability to people who can't possibly hold it the way you want. Because here's what happens when you keep waiting for others to carry your pain. You delay the work that actually heals it. Healing is often boring. It's not a big talk at 2 a.m. It's not someone finally apologizing. It's not a dramatic breakthrough. It's small private decisions that nobody claps for. Sleeping on time because your nervous system is fried. Eating like you respect your future. Moving your body even when you don't feel like it. Getting sunlight. Writing the truth down. Walking without music so you can hear yourself. Cutting contact with what keeps reopening the wound. Saying no without explaining. Letting the silence be the closure. Choosing the next right action even while your emotions are still loud. And yes, it feels unfair at first. Because part of you wants someone to look at your pain and say, "I see all of it. I feel it with you. I will make it lighter." But the adult truth is this. No one can feel your pain at full volume except you, which means no one can fully save you from it except you. So instead of asking, "Why don't they care enough?" ask, "What would I do today if I stopped expecting them to carry this for me?" Because when you stop demanding that people treat your pain like a sacred object, you actually start treating yourself like one. You become less bitter, more grounded, more self-led. You stop needing the world to pause for you, and you start building a life that can hold you even when the world doesn't. And that's not loneliness, that's strength. Seeking validation wastes your life. Not in a dramatic way, not like one big decision that ruins everything overnight, but in the quiet way, the way a slow leak ruins a full tank. Because validation doesn't just take your time, it takes your attention. And attention is the only real currency you have. The one thing you can't earn back once it's spent. You can feel it in the small moments. You post something and then keep checking. You say something and then replay it. You do a good thing and still look around for someone to notice. You're improving, but you're still waiting for permission to feel proud. And if nobody claps, a part of you starts doubting whether it mattered at all. That's the deal validation makes with you. I'll let you feel okay, but only if somebody else confirms it. And when you accept that deal, you basically rent your self-worth from other people. You don't own it. You borrow it. You keep it as long as the crowd is in a good mood, as long as your partner responds the way you want, as long as your friends react, as long as strangers agree with your choices, as long as you're chosen, included, praised, noticed, and approved. It feels normal because everyone does it. But look at the cost. When you tie your value to other people's reactions, you become easier to control. A compliment can lift you too high, and one cold message can drop you too low. A scene without a reply can ruin your focus. A little criticism can make you shrink. A lack of attention can make you chase. And suddenly, you're not living your life anymore. You're managing your image of it, like you're constantly negotiating with an invisible judge. This is why validation is addictive. It's not because you're shallow, it's because your mind learns fast. It learns, when they approve, I feel safe. So you start optimizing for that feeling. You start choosing what will be liked, not what is true. You start saying what will be accepted, not what you mean. You start staying quiet to avoid disapproval. You start tolerating disrespect because confrontation might cost you a connection. You start watering down your standards because you don't want to be the difficult one. And the darkest part is how it keeps you stuck. Because growth often looks ugly at first. Discipline looks boring. Boundaries look rude to people who benefited from you having none. Focus looks like distance. Self-respect looks like arrogance to someone who's used to you being small. So if you need validation to move forward, you will hesitate every time your improvement risks making someone uncomfortable. You'll keep returning to the old version of you, the version people recognize, the version that gets quick approval, even if that version slowly kills your peace. Epictetus put it cleanly: if you want to be free, don't wish for others to behave as you wish, and that includes their approval. Because freedom isn't loud. Freedom is calm. It's the ability to keep doing the right thing, even when nobody is cheering. So what do you do with this, practically, without turning into a cold robot? You build an inner scorecard, not a fake, I don't care what anyone thinks mask, but a real private standard that doesn't change based on someone's mood. You start asking different questions at the end of your day. Did I do what I said I would do? Did I protect my energy? Did I act with self-respect? Did I move one step forward, even if nobody noticed? Did I keep my word to myself? Because when your self-esteem comes from keeping promises to yourself, you become hard to shake. Your confidence stops being a performance and starts being evidence. And you also notice something else. A lot of validation chasing is really pain avoidance. It's easier to refresh your phone than to sit in silence and face what you're avoiding. It's easier to seek reassurance than to do the work that would make reassurance unnecessary. It's easier to hope someone chooses you than to choose yourself and risk being alone for a while. But the moment you stop begging for the outside world to confirm you, you get your life back. You stop explaining your choices to people who aren't building your life. You stop auditioning. You stop chasing reactions. You start doing things for results, not applause. And slowly, your nervous system calms down, because it's no longer living on a roller coaster of approval and rejection. And the irony is, when you stop needing validation, you often become more respected. Not because you're trying to prove something, but because you're no longer easy to pull around with attention. So ask yourself, honestly, how many decisions have you made just to be liked? How many truths have you swallowed just to keep the peace? How much of your energy is still spent trying to be seen, instead of becoming undeniable? Silence reveals who really cares. Not the kind of silence where you're punishing people or playing games. I'm talking about a quieter move. You stop over-explaining, you stop chasing, you stop forcing your presence into places where it isn't being welcomed, and you simply step back. And what happens next is almost always uncomfortable at first, because silence feels like risk. When you're used to being the one who keeps things alive, sending the text, checking in, smoothing tension, making sure nobody forgets you, silence feels like you're about to disappear. Your mind starts panicking. What if they don't reach out? What if they move on? What if I was never important? But that panic is exactly the point. Because if someone only stays connected when you perform, then what you had wasn't connection, it was consumption. A lot of people confuse effort with love. They think, I'm always there, I'm always available, I'm always explaining myself, so this must mean I'm loyal, I'm good. But sometimes what it really means is, you're scared to be replaced. You're scared that if you stop pushing, the relationship will collapse. And if it collapses the moment you stop pushing, it was already collapsing. You were just holding it up alone. Silence is the moment you put the weight down, and when you do that, you learn something fast. Who checks in because they actually care, and who only interacts when it benefits them? Who respects you when you're not entertaining? Who values you when you're not useful? Who notices your absence without you having to announce it like a news headline? It's not personal, it's information. Some people don't miss you. They miss what you gave them. Your attention, your reassurance, your emotional labor, your constant willingness to be the bigger person. And the reason silence hurts is because it exposes the truth you were trying not to see. You were feeding something that wasn't feeding you back. So the next time you feel that urge to explain yourself, why you're quiet, why you're distant, why you're changing, pause. Because explaining too much is usually a sign you don't trust your own decision. You're trying to convince them so you can feel less guilty. But growth doesn't need a committee. Boundaries don't need a debate. There's an old Stoic line I love because it's so simple it almost sounds rude. Be silent for the most part and speak only when you must, and then briefly. It's not telling you to become cold. It's telling you to stop leaking yourself. Stop talking your way into being tolerated. Stop negotiating for basic respect. Silence is how you stop auditioning. And here's what makes this powerful. When you stop chasing, you stop giving people the ability to define your worth through their response. You stop making your peace dependent on whether they reply. You stop handing them the remote control to your nervous system. Now, some people will disappear when you get quiet. They won't ask, they won't check, they won't care. And it's going to sting, not because you're weak, but because you're human. You invested, you believed, you gave real energy. And watching someone walk away calmly can feel like someone deleting you. But the sting is also clarity, because it's better to feel the truth once than to live in confusion for years. And sometimes the opposite happens. Sometimes you get quiet and someone surprises you. They reach out, not with drama, not with guilt, just a simple, honest, "Hey, you've been on my mind. Are you okay?" And that moment matters because it's proof that real care doesn't require you to beg for it. It doesn't require you to perform. It shows up. So silence becomes a filter. It separates people who are connected to your soul from people who are connected to your availability. And if you're thinking, but what if everyone disappears? Then let that thought land for a second. Because if silence makes everyone vanish, then you weren't surrounded by people. You were surrounded by habits. And that's not a life. That's a loop. This is why stepping back is not losing. It's reclaiming. It's you finally saying, I'm not going to buy love with effort anymore. I'm not going to trade my peace for crumbs. I'm not going to keep proving I'm worthy of basic respect. Silence doesn't make you lonely. It makes you honest. It shows you what's real. And once you see what's real, you can stop wasting your heart on what isn't. Stop performing for an invisible audience. Because a lot of your anxiety isn't coming from real danger. It's coming from the feeling that you're being watched. Like every move is being evaluated, like people are collecting evidence on you, like one mistake will define you, like you have to look right, sound right, Be right all the time. But most of that pressure is imagined. Not imagined as in fake, but imagined as in your mind is creating an audience that isn't actually there. You walk into a room and you assume everyone notices your flaws. You post something and you assume everyone is judging your intention. You speak and you assume your tone is being analyzed. You change your path and you assume people are offended. You distance yourself and you assume they're thinking about you non-stop. And then your life becomes a constant performance review. Here's the truth. Most people are not tracking you. They don't have the time. They're too busy tracking themselves. They might glance. They might react for a second. They might even talk about you for a moment. Then they go back to their own story, their own worries, their own image, their own problems. Even when people judge you, it's usually not because you're that important to them. It's because judging you gives them a temporary feeling of control over their own insecurity. So when you perform for that invisible audience, you're working hard for a paycheck that doesn't exist. And performing is exhausting because it forces you to split into two people, the person you are and the person you're trying to look like. You start living in, how is this perceived, instead of, is this true for me? You choose what's safe instead of what's right. You avoid growth because it might look awkward at first. You stay predictable because unpredictability risks criticism. Even your good behavior starts to be about optics. You help people so you can be seen as helpful. You stay calm so you can be seen as mature. You stay quiet so you can be seen as unbothered. And that sounds harmless until you realize you're not actually living. You're managing your brand. And the invisible audience gets worse in the digital world because social media makes it feel real. You can literally count views, count likes, count reactions, count silence. So your brain starts treating attention like measurement of worth. You start living like your life is content and your emotions are a product. That's when you lose yourself. Because when you're always trying to be seen a certain way, you stop asking the most important question. What do I actually want? Not what will impress them, not what will keep them, not what will make them regret losing me. What do I want when nobody is watching? This is why private discipline is so powerful. It's the opposite of performance. Performance is doing things to be noticed. Discipline is doing things even when nobody notices. Performance needs an audience. Discipline needs a standard. And when you build your life around your standard instead of their eyes, your anxiety drops because the nervous system calms down when it's not constantly scanning for approval. So the practical shift is simple. Start doing more things privately. Not because you're hiding, but because you're building. You lift when nobody claps. You read when nobody praises you. You save money when nobody knows. You fix your sleep when nobody sees. You say no without making a speech about it. You stop announcing your transformation while you're still fragile. You let results do the talking later. Because the truth is, the strongest version of you is not built in public. It's built in the hours where nobody cares. And that's not depressing. That's clean. That's the moment you stop living for an invisible audience and you finally start living for yourself. Your energy is leaking into the wrong people. Not in some dramatic, obvious way, more like a slow drain you don't notice until you're tired all the time, until your patience is thinner, your focus is weaker, your confidence feels unstable, and you can't even explain why. You just know you're giving too much of yourself away, and somehow you're still not getting your life back. Energy leaks through attention first, through the quiet habit of checking who viewed, who replied, who didn't, through reading a short message 3 different ways, through replaying a conversation in your head while you're driving, showering, trying to sleep, through trying to predict people's moods like it's your job, through carrying somebody else's approval like it's a medical device you can't live without. And the worst part is how normal it feels. Because you don't call it leaking, you call it caring, you call it being thoughtful, you call it being emotionally intelligent, you call it being loyal. But if caring is costing you your stability, it's not care anymore. It's an addiction to control. It's your nervous system trying to feel safe by constantly monitoring other people. That's why certain people leave you exhausted, even when nothing bad happened. You spend time with them, and you feel like you were on stage. You feel like you had to manage the vibe. You had to be careful. You had to keep them interested, keep them calm, keep them pleased, keep them close. Maybe you were trying to earn warmth from someone who only gives it when you perform. Maybe you were trying to get clarity from someone who speaks in mixed signals. Maybe you were trying to get respect from someone who only respects you when you're useful. And the leak doesn't just take your mood, it steals your future. Because the energy you spend tracking people is the same energy you need to build your body, build your skills, build your money, build your craft, build your peace. It's the same focus you need to change your habits. It's the same mental space you need for deep work. It's the same emotional bandwidth you need for the people who actually show up cleanly. So the real question isn't, do they like me? The real question is, what does it cost me to keep trying with them? Some people cost you sleep. Some cost you self-respect. Some cost you your momentum. Some cost you your identity, because the longer you orbit them, the more you become a version of yourself that doesn't feel like you. A smaller version, a softer version, a version always waiting for the next signal. And if you're honest, you already know who those people are. They're the ones who keep you in your head, the ones who make you second-guess your instincts, the ones who disappear and reappear just enough to keep you attached, the ones who take without noticing they take, the ones who always have a reason, always have an excuse, always have a story, while you keep paying with your attention. Seneca had a line that hits hard because it's so simple. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. That waste doesn't always look like laziness. Sometimes it looks like emotional labor for people who don't return it. Sometimes it looks like proving yourself to someone who benefits from you feeling unsure. Sometimes it looks like staying emotionally available to people who treat you like a backup plan. So what do? You stop romanticizing the drain. You stop calling it connection when it's really just attachment. You start treating your attention like money. You don't hand it out just because someone asks for it. You invest it where it grows something, where it builds you, where it strengthens you, where it makes your life quieter, not louder. That means you begin to notice patterns. Who only comes around when they need something? Who contacts you only when they're bored? Who never asks questions about your life but always has a crisis? Who makes you feel anxious instead of steady? Who makes you chase instead of choose? Who leaves you feeling like you have to earn basic respect? And then you make one clean decision. You reduce access. Not with drama, not with speeches, not with revenge. Just a shift in availability, a shift in response time, a shift in how much of your inner world you give to someone who hasn't proven they can hold it. You stop pouring into cups with holes. Because your energy is your life, it becomes your habits, it becomes your posture, it becomes your standards, it becomes your future. And if your future feels smaller lately, it's usually because too much of you is parked in places that don't deserve it. So take it back from the endless explaining, from the constant checking, from the emotional chasing, from the people who make you feel like love is something you have to earn every day. And put it into something that can't ignore you. Put it into your body, your craft, your discipline, your boundaries, your peace. Because when your energy stops leaking into the wrong people, your life starts growing again, quietly, almost immediately. You don't need to explain your growth. That urge to explain is usually not about communication, it's about fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of looking different, fear of losing access to people who were comfortable with the old version of you. So you start doing this thing where you try to make your evolution sound acceptable. You try to soften it, translate it, justify it, prove it's not an attack on anyone. And the problem is, the more you explain, the more you hand people a vote on your life. You start acting like your boundaries need approval, like your distance needs a permission slip, like your healing needs to be defended in court, like you owe a full presentation about why you changed your mind, why you pulled back, why you stopped tolerating certain behavior, why you're not available the way you used to be. But growth is not a debate. Most of the time, the people demanding explanations aren't actually curious. They're uncomfortable, because your change forces them to face something they didn't want to face. Maybe they benefited from you being too forgiving, too open, too accessible, too easy to manipulate, too afraid to disappoint. When you start leveling up, emotionally, physically, financially, mentally, some people don't celebrate it. They question it, they label it, they try to shrink it, they say you're acting different, like that's a crime. And if you take the bait and start explaining, you're basically saying, "You're right, I should convince you that my growth is reasonable." But here's the truth. People don't need to understand your boundaries to respect them. They just need to accept that they're real. The need to explain usually shows up when you're still carrying guilt, when you still want to be seen as good, when you still want to be liked by everyone, including people who don't treat you well. So you overtalk, you write long messages, you clarify your tone, you add extra kindness to make sure nobody thinks you're cold. You offer too many details because you're trying to control the story they tell about you. And you can't control it. If someone wants to misunderstand you, they will. If someone is committed to seeing your growth as betrayal, they'll frame it that way. You can write 10 paragraphs, and they'll still choose the version that makes them feel like the victim. You can give perfect logic, and they'll still respond with emotion. Because the issue was never the explanation. The issue was the loss of access. This is why the strongest move is often the quietest one. You stop narrating your transformation in real time. You stop trying to be fair to people who were never fair to you. You stop handing out behind-the-scenes footage of your decision-making. You let your actions speak. You let the new pattern be the explanation. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to be stable. Epictetus said it in a way that sounds harsh until you feel how liberating it is. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Meaning, if you're serious about getting better, you have to stop needing the crowd to approve your process. Sometimes growth looks strange to people who are used to you being predictable. Sometimes self-respect looks arrogant to people who are used to you overgiving. Sometimes peace looks boring to people who only know you when you're anxious and available. So yes, some people will question you when you stop explaining. They'll say, "What's wrong with you?" They'll say, "Why are you acting like this?" They'll say, "You changed," and you'll feel that old reflex to defend yourself. But you don't have to, because the old you would have turned that into a long conversation. The new you can turn it into a standard. Not rude, not dramatic, just clear, short, clean. You're allowed to outgrow environments without giving a speech. You're allowed to protect your time without providing a biography. You're allowed to step away without negotiating. And when you do that, something important happens inside you. You stop living as a public project. You start living as a private commitment. That's the whole point of this episode. Your life gets better when your self-worth is not hanging from people's reactions. And one of the fastest ways to cut that rope is to stop explaining your growth. Because explanations can become chains. They keep you attached to the old identity. They keep you in conversations you shouldn't be in. They keep you emotionally available to people who don't deserve your inner world. They invite arguments. They invite guilt. They invite bargaining. Silence, on the other hand, lets your life move forward. So let them be confused. Let them make their comments. Let them think what they think. Your job isn't to manage their interpretation. Your job is to keep building the version of you that doesn't need their permission to breathe. Attention is not love. That's one of the cleanest truths you can learn, and also one of the hardest, because attention feels warm at first. It feels like proof. It feels like you matter. And when you've been starving emotionally, even small crumbs can look like a meal. Even a quick message can feel like intimacy. Even someone constantly watching you can feel like care. But attention is cheap. Love is not. Attention can be random. Love is consistent. Attention can be curiosity, boredom, loneliness, ego, habit, even control. Love is a decision. And once you learn the difference, your whole emotional life starts to calm down because you stop mistaking noise for safety. A lot of people will look at you, react to you, even chase you for a while, and still not truly care about your well-being. They like how you make them feel. They like the entertainment. They like the access. They like the way you listen. They like the way you soften their day. They like the image of being connected to you. But if you stop providing that, they fade. Not because you did something wrong, but because what they wanted wasn't you. It was the experience of you. That's why attention can be so confusing. Because it can imitate love almost perfectly. It can show up fast. It can be intense. It can be constant. It can make you feel chosen. And then one day, when you actually need support, it disappears. And you're left asking the same painful question. How can someone be so present and still not be there? Because presence is not the same as devotion. Someone can give you attention while still keeping you at a distance. Someone can flirt with your mind and still not respect your heart. Someone can like your company and still not value your peace. Someone can text you every day and still not be willing to show up when it matters. Someone can watch everything you do and still not protect you from harm. They can be loud, but not loyal. And if you're not careful, attention trains you to accept inconsistency. It trains you to chase highs. It trains you to live off signals. A reply becomes a reward. A like becomes relief. A little interest becomes hope. And then you start tolerating things you never would have tolerated if you were calm. You start lowering your standards just to keep the connection alive. You start explaining yourself again. You start performing again. You start thinking, if I just do a little more, they'll finally love me the way I want. But love doesn't need you to audition. Love doesn't require you to shrink to stay. Love doesn't play games with your nervous system. So the real skill here is learning what love looks like when it's quiet. It looks like consistency. It looks like respect, even when you're not useful. It looks like someone caring about your long-term good, not just their short-term feeling. It looks like someone who doesn't disappear the moment you stop entertaining them. It looks like a person who can handle your boundaries without turning it into a fight. And if you think about it, the biggest proof is simple. When you're not doing well, do they get closer or do they get annoyed? Because attention loves the highlight reel. Love can sit with the human parts. This is why so many people end up stuck in cycles with the wrong person, the wrong friend group, the wrong dynamic. They're not addicted to the person. They're addicted to the attention, the spikes, the sudden warmth, the feeling of being wanted. It feels like life. It feels like something, and silence feels like death. So they accept chaos just to avoid emptiness. But that's not love. That's a nervous system chasing relief. And once you see that, you can make a cleaner choice. You stop giving your heart to attention, and you start saving your loyalty for actions. Not words, not intensity, not vibes. Actions. Who shows up when it's inconvenient? Who respects your boundaries without punishing you? Who stays consistent when there's nothing to gain? Who wants you stable, not dependent? Because the moment you stop confusing attention with love, you stop being easy to manipulate. You stop being pulled around by mixed signals. You stop settling for the loudest person in the room, and you start valuing the steadiest one. And maybe the biggest shift is this. You stop using attention as proof that you're worthy. You become worthy in your own eyes first. You become solid. And from that place, you don't chase attention anymore. You recognize it, you appreciate it when it's real, and you let it pass when it's not. The world respects visible results, not hidden excuses. And I don't say that to make you cynical. I say it because it's the fastest way to stop wasting your life trying to be understood by people who don't have the time or the capacity to understand you. Most of us carry a private folder of reasons. Real reasons. Heavy reasons. You didn't become this way for no reason. The procrastination, the mood swings, the inconsistency, the fear, the numbness, the overthinking. A lot of it is connected to things you survived, things you learned, things that shaped you when nobody was watching. And because those reasons feel so real inside you, you assume they should matter to everyone else. But outside your mind, reasons don't land the way you think they do. People don't live in your nervous system. They don't wake up with your memories. They don't feel the same weight behind your "I'm trying." They just see what shows up. They see the missed deadline, not the childhood that made discipline feel unsafe. They see the inconsistency, not the anxiety that makes starting feel like jumping off a cliff. They see the silence, not the exhaustion. They see the outcome, not the inner war. And that's not unfair. That's just how the world works. Because most people are dealing with their own life at full volume. They don't have the bandwidth to hold your context the way you hold it. So when you try to earn respect by explaining, you often lose respect instead. Not because explanation is wrong, but because explanation can sound like negotiation, like you're asking to be evaluated on intention instead of performance. The world doesn't run on intention, it runs on proof. And if you take that personally, you'll stay angry. But if you accept it, you'll get powerful, because you'll stop spending your best energy on defending your story and start spending it on changing your habits. There's a reason you can tell someone your plan 1,000 times, and nothing changes in how they see you, until the day your life looks different. You can promise you're leveling up. You can swear you're serious. You can say you're focused now. You can explain your pain perfectly. But the only thing that shifts perception, your perception of yourself too, is consistency that shows up in the real world. Results are loud. Not because they're arrogant, but because they're undeniable. And this is where a lot of people get stuck. They think being understood is the same as being respected. So they chase conversations, they chase closure, they chase validation for their struggles. They try to make people see how hard it's been. And sometimes, yeah, you deserve empathy. Sometimes you deserve someone to say, "I get it, that was heavy." But empathy doesn't replace responsibility. And if you keep trying to trade empathy for progress, you'll keep repeating the same cycle. Explain, feel relieved for a moment, then go back to the same patterns, and then need to explain again. That's the loop. And the way out is uncomfortable at first, because it asks you to stop talking and start doing. It asks you to accept that your private excuses, no matter how valid, don't build your future. Only your actions do. Marcus Aurelius has a line that cuts through all of this with brutal calm. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. It's not a moral lecture, it's a strategy. Less explanation, more embodiment. So here's the shift. You don't need to convince people you're changing. You need to build evidence. You don't need to win debates about why you're the way you are. You need to become the kind of person whose life speaks clearly. Because when you start stacking visible results, something changes in your mind first. You stop needing external reassurance. Your confidence stops being a mood and starts being a record. You did the work on Monday. You did it on Tuesday. You did it when you didn't feel like it. And now you have proof that you can rely on yourself. That's real self-respect. And ironically, once you have that, you stop caring as much about what people think, because you're no longer trying to borrow worth from their reactions. You're generating it from your discipline. This doesn't mean you become cold. It means you become clean. You stop telling long stories about what you're going to do. You stop defending what you haven't built yet. You stop using your pain as a reason to stay the same. You let your habits do the talking. Sleep becomes a result. Fitness becomes a result. Boundaries become a result. Money saved becomes a result. A calmer nervous system becomes a result. Work completed becomes a result. And once those start showing up, you don't have to announce anything. You don't have to explain anything. People can feel it. They treat you differently when you treat yourself differently. Not because they suddenly became wise, but because the world responds to what's visible. So if you've been carrying excuses like they're a shield, try something else. Carry consistency, quietly, daily, without speeches, without drama. Build the kind of results that remove the need for explanations. Because at the end of the day, the world isn't asking you for a perfect story. It's asking you for a real life. Self-neglect begins when you obsess over others. It rarely starts as something ugly. It starts as, "I'm just trying to understand." You're just trying to read the room, to figure out what they meant, to make sense of the shift in their energy, to decode why they're distant, why they're acting different, why they didn't reply the way they used to. It feels like you're being careful, like you're protecting yourself. But over time, it becomes a habit that quietly steals your life. Because the more you obsess over other people, the more you abandon your own center. Your attention moves outward and stays there, like a security camera that never stops recording, and you don't realize what you're losing until you wake up one day and you're behind on your own goals, behind on your own health, behind on your own peace. And somehow you know everything about their mood, their timeline, their patterns, their excuses, their psychology. But you don't know what you want anymore. That's what self-neglect looks like in modern life. It's not always skipping meals or sleeping late. Sometimes it's more subtle. It's skipping your priorities because you're waiting for a message. It's delaying your work because you're replaying a conversation. It's losing your appetite because you're checking if they viewed your story. It's avoiding the gym because you're emotionally exhausted from overthinking. It's waking up and letting the first thing you feel be someone else's energy. And the tragedy is, you start calling that love. But love that costs you your self-respect isn't love. It's attachment, it's fear. It's a nervous system that learned, at some point, that attention equals safety, that being chosen equals worth, that being forgotten equals danger. So you monitor, you chase, you analyze. You try to control outcomes you can't control, because control feels like relief. The problem is, it never lasts. You get one reply and you calm down. Then another silence and you spiral again. One compliment and you feel alive. One cold tone and you crash. And while you're on that emotional roller coaster, your own life is sitting in the corner, untouched, waiting for you to come back. Here's the brutal truth. Obsession is not devotion. It's distraction. If you're constantly thinking about what people think of you, you're not building anything, you're not learning, you're not training, you're not creating, you're not healing, you're just reacting. And reaction feels like movement, but it's not progress, it's motion without direction. That's why some people stay stuck for years without realizing it. They don't have a discipline problem, they have an attention problem. Their attention is scattered across people who aren't investing in them, across imaginary conversations, across outcomes that never arrive. They spend their best mental hours in someone else's head, and then they wonder why they feel drained, why they can't focus, why they don't recognize themselves. And the worst part is how normal society makes it seem. We romanticize obsession. We call it caring too much. We call it being sensitive. We call it having a big heart. But a big heart without boundaries becomes a broken heart. And a mind without direction becomes a crowded mind. So the shift here is simple, but it's not easy. You have to start returning to yourself on purpose, not with dramatic declarations, not with speeches, with small, private reclaims. When you catch yourself checking, stalking, replaying, wondering, predicting, you interrupt it. You don't punish yourself, you just redirect. You bring your attention back to the one place it actually makes a difference. Your next action. What's the next right thing you can do for your body? What's the next right thing you can do for your work? What's the next right thing you can do for your mind? Because the truth is, you can't think your way into being valued. You can't analyze your way into being chosen. You can't obsess your way into peace. Peace comes from ownership, from living in your lane, from building a life that doesn't collapse when someone is inconsistent. The Stoics had a quiet obsession of their own, but it was the right kind. Not obsession with other people's reactions. Obsession with what's in your control, your judgment, your choices, your habits, your standards, your character. That's where your power lives, and every minute you spend outside of that is a minute you're not investing in your future. So if you've been neglecting yourself lately, don't make it a moral thing. Don't call yourself weak. Just call it what it is. Your attention has been misplaced, and attention can be reclaimed. Not tomorrow, not when they finally respond, not when you get closure. Now. Because the moment you stop obsessing over others, you stop bleeding time. You stop bleeding energy. You stop bleeding self-respect. And you start becoming someone you can rely on again. You are not the center of everyone's mind. That sounds obvious when you hear it, but it doesn't feel obvious when you're living inside your own head. When you walk into a room and your body tightens like you're about to be examined. When you post something and you start checking the reaction like it's a verdict. When you say one sentence and then spend the next hour replaying it, wondering if you sounded stupid, too intense, too quiet, too something. Most people don't realize how much of their stress comes from this one illusion, the belief that they're being watched. Not literally watched, but evaluated, judged, measured, remembered. As if everyone is keeping a file on you, collecting evidence, building a case. And that belief turns ordinary life into a stage. You stop being present in your own experience, and you start managing how you're perceived inside theirs. But here's the truth that sobers you in the best way. People are mostly thinking about themselves. They're thinking about how they look, what they said, what they should have said, whether they're falling behind, whether they're doing enough, whether they're loved, whether they're failing, whether they're safe. They're carrying their own shame, their own insecurity, their own private story, and you're usually a small moment in the middle of that storm. Even when someone does judge you, it's rarely the deep, detailed judgment your anxious mind imagines. It's usually a quick reaction. Then they go back to their life. Your mind takes a 2-second glance and turns it into a 2-day sentence. That's why you can feel exposed, even when nothing happened. And it's why rejection can feel so heavy, because you don't just feel not chosen, you feel seen as unworthy, like the whole world witnessed it. But most rejection happens quietly, in someone else's limited perspective. And then it disappears into the noise of their day. Marcus Aurelius nailed the irony with one line: "We care more about what others think than what we think of ourselves." And if you sit with that, you realize how strange it is. You live with yourself every day. You know your intentions. You know your effort. You know what it costs you to keep going. And still, one random opinion can shake your whole mood, like it carries more truth than your own inner experience. That's the trap. Because once you believe you're the center of everyone's mind, you start behaving like your survival depends on their approval. You become hyper-aware. You start scanning faces. You start reading subtext. You start guessing motives. You start apologizing for your existence in subtle ways. You hesitate. You shrink. You edit your personality in real time. And then you wonder why you feel drained. The exhaustion isn't coming from life. It's coming from the constant mental performance, the constant attempt to be safe in other people's eyes. But the relief comes fast when you accept the opposite. You're not that important to strangers, and you're not that important to most people most of the time. Again, not in a cruel way, in a freeing way. Because if you're not the main character in their head, you can stop acting like you're on trial. You can stop explaining every choice. You can stop carrying imaginary shame. You can let yourself be human in public without turning every moment into a reputation crisis. And there's something practical here that changes behavior immediately. When you catch yourself spiraling, they must think I'm weird. They must think I'm failing. They must think I'm not enough. Ask yourself one simple question. What are they probably thinking about right now? Most likely themselves, their phone, their plans, their insecurities, their next problem, their own small embarrassment from earlier. The world is not sitting around analyzing you. It's barely even paying attention. So you shift your focus back to what's real. You start building a life that doesn't depend on being perfectly understood. You show up messy sometimes. You speak even if your voice shakes. You take action even if you might look awkward at first. You stop trying to win everyone over. You stop treating mild discomfort like danger. Because that's the deeper point. Your nervous system has learned to treat judgment as a threat, but most judgment isn't a threat. It's just noise. And the more you expose yourself to being seen without trying to control it, the more your body learns a new lesson. I can survive being misunderstood. I can survive not being liked. I can survive a moment of awkwardness. I can still respect myself. That's emotional independence in real life. Not a quote, not a mindset poster, just you walking through the world without needing to be held by everybody's opinion. So if you've been feeling watched lately, if you've been overthinking the smallest details, if you've been living like your mistakes are permanent and public, let this truth settle in. You're not the center of everyone's mind. And that's exactly why you can finally relax enough to become yourself. Rejection becomes lighter when you stop personalizing everything. Because most rejection isn't a sentence about your worth. It's a snapshot of someone else's limits. When you personalize rejection, you don't just hear no. You hear, I'm not good enough. You hear, I'm forgettable. You hear, I'm behind. You hear, there's something wrong with me. And your mind doesn't treat that like information. It treats it like identity, like a verdict. That's why it feels heavy. You're not reacting to what happened. You're reacting to what you think it means about you. And the mind is aggressive with meaning. It will take one ignored text and build a whole theory of your value, one lost opportunity, and turn it into a prophecy. One person choosing someone else and make it sound like the whole world just voted you out. But rejection in real life is usually much smaller than the story you attach to it. Sometimes people reject you because they're scared, sometimes because they're distracted, sometimes because they're emotionally unavailable, sometimes because they're loyal to a version of you that no longer exists, sometimes because you remind them of something they don't want to face in themselves, sometimes because they simply don't have the capacity. Sometimes it's timing, sometimes it's taste, sometimes it's not even rejection. It's just life moving fast and people being inconsistent. None of that is a compliment, but it's also not a condemnation. The biggest mistake is assuming that a no is always personal, like you were evaluated fairly, deeply, and completely. You weren't. Most people don't have the clarity to evaluate even themselves, let alone you. They react from mood, from bias, from history, from insecurity, from convenience. And you take their momentary reaction and treat it like truth. That's how you get crushed. Let's make it real. You apply for a job and you don't get it. You assume you're not talented, but maybe they already had someone internal. Maybe the manager was afraid of hiring someone who could outshine them. Maybe the budget got cut. Maybe the role changed. Maybe you were great, but you were great for a different season. You like someone and they don't choose you. You assume you're unlovable, but maybe they're addicted to chaos. Maybe they only feel safe with people who keep them guessing. Maybe they're not ready for real intimacy. Maybe they're chasing validation, not connection. Maybe you were too healthy for their pattern. A friend pulls away. You assume you're too much. But maybe they're overwhelmed. Maybe they're ashamed. Maybe they can't match your growth. Maybe they only liked you when you were available to carry their problems. The point isn't to invent excuses for people. The point is to stop making everything about your value. Because when you personalize rejection, you double the pain. You get hit once by the event, and then you hit yourself again with interpretation. And that second hit is usually the one that keeps you awake at night. Seneca said it clean. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality, and rejection is one of the clearest examples. The imagination doesn't just feel the rejection, it dramatizes it. It rewrites your past. It predicts your future. It turns one door closing into the end of the road. But if you strip the imagination away and keep the reality, rejection becomes a lot lighter. It becomes, this didn't work. This wasn't aligned. This person didn't choose me. This opportunity didn't happen. That's it. Still disappointing, but not humiliating. Still painful, but not identity-shattering. And here's the moment where you get your power back, when you stop asking, "What does this say about me?" and you start asking, "What does this show me? What does it show me about their capacity? What does it show me about fit? What does it show me about timing? What does it show me about what I'm tolerating? What does it show me about where I'm still seeking approval?" Because rejection, when you stop personalizing it, becomes feedback. And feedback can be used. It can sharpen you. It can redirect you. It can save you from forcing a life that doesn't fit. You don't have to become numb. You don't have to pretend rejection doesn't hurt. You just have to stop treating it like proof that you're small. If someone doesn't choose you, let it be information. They're not your path. If a door closes, let it be clarity. You're being pushed to build something else. If someone misunderstands you, let it be a reminder. Your job isn't to be perfectly interpreted by everyone. And the calmer you get about rejection, the less power people have over your nervous system. You stop chasing. You stop begging for closure. You stop writing long speeches. You stop trying to earn what should be freely given. You walk away cleaner. You recover faster. You keep building. So the question isn't, how do I avoid rejection? You can't. The real question is, how do I stop letting rejection define me? Your habits matter more than their opinions, because opinions are light. They float. They change with mood, with jealousy, with misunderstanding, with the kind of day someone is having. Today they admire you. Tomorrow they dismiss you. Today they call you focused. Tomorrow they call you cold. And if you build your identity on that kind of weather, you'll spend your whole life dressing for storms that never stop. Habits are different. Habits are heavy. They have gravity. They build a body. They build a bank account. They build a reputation. They build a nervous system that doesn't panic every time something goes quiet. Habits don't care if you're in the mood. They don't care if you feel inspired. They don't care if someone understands you. They just quietly shape what your life becomes. And most people never really sit with how unfair that is in the best way, because you can be misunderstood and still win. You can be doubted and still build. You can be judged and still grow. The only time opinions become dangerous is when they start steering your daily behavior. When you start adjusting your routine to keep people comfortable. When you stop going to the gym because someone might tease you. When you stop studying because nobody claps. When you stop setting boundaries because you want to be seen as easy. When you start spending money to look successful instead of saving money to become stable. When you start posting your progress instead of doing your progress. That's how opinions steal your future, not by being loud, but by getting you to abandon the boring work. And the boring work is where everything is. The body you want isn't built by one intense week. It's built by a small set of repeated actions that look almost unimpressive day to day. The confidence you want isn't built by one compliment. It's built by showing yourself over and over that you do what you said you'd do. The peace you want isn't built by one perfect conversation. It's built by the habits that regulate your mind. Sleep, movement, sunlight, solitude, honest self-talk, distance from what drains you. So when someone gives you an opinion, good or bad, it's worth asking yourself one clean question. Does this opinion change what I need to do today? Most of the time, the answer is no. You still need to eat well. You still need to work. You still need to train. You still need to keep your word. You still need to protect your time. But your mind will try to make you forget that. Your mind will act like the opinion is urgent, like it's a fire you need to put out, like you need to respond, explain, prove, defend, or fix your image. And if you follow that impulse, you end up living in reaction, not in construction. That's why people get stuck. They're not losing because they're untalented. They're losing because they're interruptible. One comment can hijack their day. One look can change their mood. One person's approval can become a drug. And when your attention is that easy to steal, your habits can't compound. You can't build momentum. You can't stack small wins. You can't become solid, because solidity requires repetition, and repetition requires protection. There's a Stoic idea that keeps showing up in different forms. You don't control what people think, but you do control what you practice, and what you practice becomes you. So if you're practicing checking, explaining, chasing, performing, comparing, then that becomes your identity, an identity that's always waiting for permission to feel okay. But if you practice discipline, patience, boundaries, craft, fitness, self-respect, then something shifts. You become less emotionally available to noise because your life has a direction. And this is the part people don't like to hear, but it's true. The world eventually believes what you repeatedly do, not what you repeatedly say. Not your intentions, not your backstory, not your potential, your repetitions. So if someone thinks you're weak, but your habits make you stronger every week, their opinion becomes irrelevant over time. If someone thinks you're behind, but your habits make you more skilled every month, the gap closes quietly. If someone doubts you, but your habits keep you consistent, the doubt loses its power because you stop needing their belief to move. That's what real freedom looks like in daily life. Not confidence as a feeling, but confidence as a routine. So don't ask, "What do they think of me?" when you wake up. Ask, "What do I do today that makes my life better tomorrow?" Because if your habits are right, the opinions don't matter. And if your habits are wrong, the opinions won't save you. And maybe that's the best way to end this point, with a quiet challenge. If nobody had an opinion about you for the next 6 months, what would you build? And what habits would you protect to make it real? Stop chasing closure from people who moved on, because one of the most exhausting places to live is in the sentence, "I just need to understand." You tell yourself you're looking for peace, but what you're really looking for is a final conversation that makes the pain feel fair. A clean explanation, a real apology. A moment where they finally admit what they did. A moment where they say the right words with the right tone and your nervous system finally unclenches. And I get it. Closure sounds mature. It sounds reasonable. It sounds like healing. But most of the time, chasing closure is just you staying emotionally attached to someone who already left. It's you trying to get validation from the same source that created the confusion. It's you putting your peace in someone else's hands and saying, "Please return it to me." And here's the hard truth. A lot of people can't give you closure because they don't even have clarity. They don't fully understand themselves. They don't know why they did what they did. Or they do know, but admitting it would force them to face guilt they don't want to face. So they avoid. They deflect. They change the story. They blame timing. They blame stress. They blame you. They say, "I don't know," when what they really mean is, "I don't want to say it." So you keep trying. You send one more message. You ask one more question. You replay the last conversation again, searching for hidden meaning like you're decoding a puzzle. You imagine what you should have said, what you could still say, how you could phrase it better so they finally understand. And every attempt keeps you hooked, because every attempt creates the same hope. Maybe this time I'll get the ending I deserve. But closure rarely comes from the other person. Closure comes from you deciding to stop asking. It's the moment you accept that their silence is also an answer. Their avoidance is also information. Their unwillingness to meet you with honesty is also a conclusion. Not the one you wanted, but a real one. There's a reason this hurts. Your mind hates unfinished stories. It wants a clean ending. It wants symmetry. It wants a moral lesson. It wants the pain to make sense. And when it doesn't, you feel like you can't move on without betraying yourself. But here's the paradox. The more you demand closure from them, the more you delay closure inside yourself. Because every time you reach out, you're telling your mind, we still need something from them. You keep the door cracked open. You keep the wound exposed. You stay available to be disappointed again. You stay in that fragile place where one reply can spike your hope and one silence can crash your mood. That's not healing. That's dependency dressed up as maturity. So what does real closure look like? It looks like accepting that you might never get the explanation. It looks like letting your own values be the ending. It looks like saying, I don't need them to admit it for it to be true. I don't need them to apologize for me to move forward. I don't need them to understand my pain for me to respect it. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that feels like medicine here. If someone can show me I'm wrong, I'll gladly change. It is the truth I seek. Notice what he's not saying. He's not saying, I need them to see my truth. He's saying, I seek the truth. That's the shift. You stop needing their agreement. You stop needing their confession. You stop needing their closure. You start choosing your own. And this doesn't mean you pretend nothing happened. It means you stop using them as the key to your emotional door. You close it yourself. You do it with boundaries, with distance, with no more late-night mental conversations, with no more one last message, with no more checking if they're thinking about you, with no more waiting for an apology that might never come. Because here's what's real. Some people will never give you the ending you deserve, because giving it would require them to become a person they are not. And you can't build your life around someone becoming different. So instead of chasing closure, you chase alignment. You chase your own stability. You chase habits that rebuild you. You chase the kind of peace that doesn't require permission. And when you finally stop asking them to explain, something strange happens. Your mind gets quiet, not instantly, but steadily. The story stops renewing itself. The wound stops reopening. You start waking up with more space in your chest because you're no longer living with your hand out, waiting for them to hand you back your peace. So let this be your closure. They moved on, or they stayed, but without honesty. Either way, you're done begging for an ending. You're going to create one. Boundaries matter more than being liked. Because being liked can be bought. It can be purchased with silence, with overgiving, with shrinking, with tolerating what you shouldn't tolerate, with laughing at things that disrespect you, with saying it's fine when it isn't, with keeping the peace at the cost of your peace. And that kind of like is fragile. It disappears the moment you stop paying. Boundaries, on the other hand, are expensive at first, but they pay you back for life. The reason boundaries feel so hard is because they force a truth into the open. Not everyone benefits from you being well. Some people benefit from you being available. Some benefit from you being unsure. Some benefit from you being the one who always forgives first. Some benefit from you being easy to guilt, easy to pressure, easy to manipulate. So when you start drawing lines, when you start saying no without a long explanation, When you stop responding instantly, when you stop tolerating disrespect, those people don't just get disappointed, they get offended. And that's when your old habit wakes up, the habit of trying to be liked. You start thinking, maybe I'm being too harsh, maybe I'm overreacting, maybe I should soften it, maybe I should explain more so they don't think I'm a bad person. Because somewhere inside, you learned that being liked equals safety. That if people like you, they won't leave, they won't attack you, they won't judge you, they won't punish you. But that's not true. Sometimes the people who like you the most are the people who respect you the least, because they like the version of you that doesn't require anything from them, the version of you that's always agreeable, always flexible, always understanding, always available. So when you choose boundaries, you're choosing a different kind of life, a quieter life, a life where you might be misunderstood, a life where you might disappoint people, a life where some relationships fade, and that can feel like loss. But what you gain is worth more than the approval you lose. You gain self-respect, and self-respect is the foundation of every other kind of peace. Because when you don't have boundaries, you don't just lose time, you lose identity. You start feeling like you're living for other people. Your schedule becomes someone else's mood. Your energy becomes someone else's convenience. Your emotional life becomes a negotiation, and you slowly forget what it feels like to be solid. Boundaries bring you back to yourself, not by turning you cold, but by turning you clear. And clarity is what people respond to, even if they don't like it at first. The world doesn't respect the person who's always available. It respects the person who's grounded, the person who can say no and mean it, the person who doesn't fold under pressure, the person who isn't terrified of being disliked. There's a stoic calmness to boundaries. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's not revenge. It's simply knowing what you will and won't allow, and then living in alignment with that decision. And here's what's important. Boundaries aren't just about other people, they're also about you. They're boundaries with your own impulses, with your own need to check, explain, chase, prove, overthink. A boundary that says, I don't beg for attention. A boundary that says, I don't stay where I'm disrespected. A boundary that says, I don't abandon myself to keep someone close. Because if you keep choosing being liked over being respected, you train people how to treat you. You train them that you'll accept inconsistency, that you'll forgive without change, that you'll swallow discomfort to avoid conflict. And then you wonder why they keep crossing the line. But once you set boundaries, you stop negotiating your dignity. You let people learn the new rules. Some will adjust, some won't. And that's fine, because boundaries do something incredible. They reveal who values you for you, and who values you for what they can get from you. The first group stays, even if the relationship changes. The second group resists, complains, guilt trips, or disappears. And that's not failure. That's sorting. So if you're in a season where you're scared of being disliked, remember what it costs to always be liked. You lose yourself in small, daily compromises. And if you're in a season where you're starting to set boundaries and people are reacting and it's uncomfortable, remember this. The discomfort is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's often a sign you stopped being easy. And that's the point. Because you're not here to be liked by everyone. You're here to build a life that doesn't require you to betray yourself to keep it. Your future is built in private, not in public approval. Most people don't fail because they're lazy. They fail because they keep trying to feel like the kind of person who wins, instead of quietly becoming that person when nobody is clapping. Public approval feels like progress because it gives you a quick hit. You post the plan. People hype you up. You feel powerful for a moment. You talk about your new mindset. You get the proud of you messages. You feel like you've already changed. And then reality shows up the next morning. No applause, no comments, no dopamine. And suddenly the motivation evaporates. Because what you were feeding wasn't discipline. It was the feeling of being seen. That's why so many people announce their transformation like a trailer for a movie they never finish. And it's not because they're weak. It's because the human brain loves easy rewards. Approval is a cheap reward. It doesn't demand sweat. It doesn't demand consistency. It doesn't demand that you face the boring parts. Showing up on the days when you're tired, when you're uninspired, when nothing is happening yet. But the life you want doesn't get built in the highlight reel. It gets built in the parts no one watches. It's built in the quiet hours where you're not posting, not explaining, not trying to look like you're improving, just improving. It's built when you go for the workout without telling anyone, when you read instead of scrolling, when you save money instead of spending it to prove something, when you practice your craft in silence, again and again, while nobody cares, when you shut your mouth and do the work, when you keep your promises to yourself with no witnesses. And there's something almost sacred about that privacy, because privacy removes performance. It forces honesty. It forces you to ask, do I still do this if nobody notices? Do I still show up if nobody praises me? Do I still move forward if nobody understands what I'm building? That's where real identity forms, not in what you say you'll do, not in what people think you are, in what you repeatedly do when there's no reward except self-respect. A lot of people think they need more confidence to start, but confidence is usually the result of private work. It's the calm that comes from knowing you can rely on yourself. And you can't talk your way into that. You can't get it from likes. You earn it the slow way, by stacking proof. And here's the uncomfortable part. When you build in private, you also stop needing people to understand you. You stop trying to explain your new boundaries to people who liked the old access. You stop defending your focus to people who live in distraction. You stop asking for permission to change your life. You stop needing the crowd to agree with your direction before you take the first step. Because public approval is noisy. It pulls you outward. Private work pulls you inward. And that inward pull is where you get dangerous in the best way, because you stop being easy to manipulate. You stop being easy to distract. You stop being emotionally dependent. Your life starts having weight. That's why the most powerful people you've met usually aren't the loudest. They're the steadiest. They don't need to announce everything because their life already announces it. Their calm is earned. Their boundaries are real. Their discipline has history. And if you're honest, this point might sting because you already know where your time goes. You already know how often you reach for the phone, not because you need anything, but because you want that tiny hit of attention. You already know how often you delay the work, because you're waiting to feel ready. You already know how often you substitute talking for doing, planning for executing, consuming for creating. So the shift is simple, but it requires maturity. You stop trying to win the room and you start trying to win your day. You make your life quieter on purpose so you can hear yourself again. You start protecting your mornings, protecting your energy, protecting your focus. Not as a personality, not as a brand, just as a commitment. And then you let the future arrive as a consequence. Because the truth is, the strongest version of you is not built by being admired. It's built by being consistent. And if you can learn to love the unseen work, If you can learn to respect the private hours, then your whole relationship with life changes. You stop chasing approval and you start chasing evidence. You stop trying to look like somebody and you start becoming somebody. So here's a question worth sitting with tonight. If nobody could ever praise you for the next year, if no one could see what you're doing, what would you still build and who would you still become? Comparison is a distraction from your own work. It feels productive at first. It feels like research, like you're just trying to get perspective, trying to learn what good looks like, trying to figure out where you stand. But comparison almost always turns into a quiet form of self-abandonment, because the moment you start measuring your life against someone else's life, you stop living yours. And the worst part is, you usually compare the most unfair versions. You compare your behind the scenes to their highlight reel. You compare your day 1 to their year 10. You compare your private doubts to their public confidence. You compare your messy middle to their polished result. And then you wonder why you feel late, why you feel small, why you feel like you're not enough. Comparison doesn't just steal joy, it steals focus. It takes the exact mental energy you need to build skills, build discipline, build peace, and burns it on a scoreboard that was never designed to help you. Because a scoreboard can't capture context. It can't capture what you survived. It can't capture what you value. It can't capture your constraints, your responsibilities, your personality, your different starting point. It just gives you a number, a feeling, a rank, and your mind treats that rank like truth. But it's not truth, it's noise. And it becomes a trap because it keeps you stuck in watching mode. You consume other people's progress instead of creating your own. You scroll and call it motivation, but what it really does is make you restless. It makes you impatient with your own pace. It makes you chase shortcuts. It makes you abandon your own plan every time you see someone doing something different. So you become a person with 10 strategies and no execution, 10 inspirations and no habits, a mind full of other people's lives and an empty space where your own life should be. The deeper issue is that comparison is usually trying to answer a question you think is urgent. Am I doing enough? But enough isn't a universal number. Enough depends on what you want. Enough depends on what you're building. Enough depends on the season you're in. And when you let other people define enough for you, you end up living in a constant sense of deficit, because there will always be someone richer, sharper, more attractive, more advanced, more liked, more praised. There's no finish line in comparison. So the only way to win is to stop playing. The Stoics had a simple way of cutting through this. Focus on what is within your control and ignore what is outside it. Other people's timeline is outside your control. Other people's advantages are outside your control. Other people's opinions are outside your control. Even the fact that someone else is ahead is outside your control. But your work today, that's yours. And once you really commit to that, comparison starts looking like what it truly is, a temptation to avoid the discomfort of your own progress. Because real progress is slow, it's repetitive, it's boring, it's lonely sometimes. It requires you to sit with yourself. It requires you to face your own weaknesses without distraction, and comparison offers an escape. It gives you something to blame, something to obsess over, something to judge, something to react to. It gives you a reason to postpone the hard work. What's the point if they're already so far ahead? But that's not a reason, that's sabotage. So the practical shift is brutally simple. You stop checking the scoreboard and you start tracking your reps. Not your reputation, your reps. How many days did you show up? How many hours did you practice? How many small promises did you keep? How many times did you choose discipline over mood? Because your life doesn't change from inspiration. It changes from repetition, and repetition requires attention, and comparison is the thief of attention. And here's the quiet irony. The people you compare yourself to often aren't as secure as you think. They have their own private doubts, their own fear of being surpassed, their own pressure to keep up appearances, their own comparison loop. Everyone is running some version of this game, and most people are exhausted by it. So step out, not by pretending you don't notice, not by forcing fake confidence, just by returning to your lane again and again until it becomes natural. Your lane is where your work is. Your lane is where your habits are. Your lane is where your peace is. And when you stay there long enough, you start feeling something you can't feel while comparing. Momentum. Real momentum. The kind that makes your life quieter, stronger, and more yours. So, let other people be ahead. Let other people be louder. Let other people be seen. Your job is simpler. Build what you said you'd build. Because the only comparison that matters is not you versus them. It's you today versus you yesterday. Emotional independence is a form of power, not the loud kind that needs to win every room, not the kind that tries to dominate people or prove something, but the quiet kind that shows up in the most ordinary moments, when you don't get the reply you expected, when someone's tone changes, when the attention drops, when the warmth disappears for no clear reason, and your body has that familiar instinct to panic, to chase, to fix, to explain, to restore the connection as fast as possible so you can breathe again. That's what most people don't notice. The real battle isn't happening in their relationships, it's happening in their nervous system. A single notification can lift them. A single silence can ruin their day, not because they're weak, but because the mind is trained to treat social feedback like survival. If you grew up learning that approval meant safety, then distance feels dangerous, even when it isn't. Even when it's just someone being busy. Even when it's just life. Even when it's just a person who doesn't know how to be consistent. And once that wiring is there, you start living like a person who can be steered by signals. A little attention pulls you forward. A little coldness pushes you into doubt. A tiny shift becomes a whole story. You stop being guided by your values and start being guided by the emotional weather around you. That's not love. That's not connection. That's being on a leash. And the strangest part is that the leash isn't always in someone else's hand. Sometimes it's in yours, every time you outsource your peace to something you can't control. So emotional independence isn't about not caring. It's about caring without collapsing. It's about staying soft in the heart, but solid in the spine. It's the ability to feel the discomfort of uncertainty and still choose the next right action. Because the person who can sit with discomfort without turning it into drama, without turning it into a chase, is the person who can't be easily manipulated, not by guilt, not by silence, not by sudden warmth, not by mixed signals. Their center doesn't move just because someone else's mood moved. That's why this kind of independence changes your whole presence. You stop rushing to repair what you didn't break. You stop taking responsibility for other people's inconsistency. You stop trying to earn calm by getting a certain reaction. You let people be who they are, and you let that information do its job. If someone is stable, you can meet them. If they're chaotic, you can see it clearly. If they pull away to test you, you don't fail the test by begging. You simply keep living. Epictetus said, "If you want to be free, don't wish for anything that depends on others." And that hits because it's not poetic, it's practical. If your peace depends on someone else's attention, you will pay for it daily. You will pay with overthinking, with late nights, with mood swings, with waiting, with that exhausting habit of checking your phone, checking the tone, checking the meaning, checking whether you still matter. And the cost isn't just emotional, it's physical. It shows up in tension, in sleep, in appetite, in focus, in motivation. Your whole life starts orbiting around signals. Real emotional independence is built in small private decisions, the kind no one applauds. It's the moment you feel anxiety rise and you don't feed it by sending the extra message. It's the moment you want to refresh your screen and instead you stand up, drink water, and go back to your work. It's the moment you want to replay the conversation for the 10th time and instead you take a walk and let the thoughts burn off in the air. It's choosing sleep over rumination. It's choosing routine over reaction. It's choosing your long-term life over short-term relief. And when you do that enough times, something changes that's hard to describe until you feel it. You become harder to shake. Not numb, just grounded. You still feel disappointment, but it doesn't own you. You still want connection, but you don't beg for it. You still love people, but you don't abandon yourself to keep them. You stop needing constant reassurance because your reassurance becomes internal, built from evidence. You can handle discomfort. You can keep moving. You can remain intact even when someone else is inconsistent. That's power. The kind that doesn't show off. The kind that quietly upgrades your entire life. Focus on yourself until your life speaks for you. Because if you're honest, a big part of your exhaustion isn't from what happened. It's from trying to make people understand what happened. You keep explaining your intentions. You keep defending your choices. You keep replaying the same conversations in your head, searching for the perfect sentence that would finally make them see you clearly. And the more you do it, the more you realize something painful. Most people don't change their view of you because you explained better. They change their view when your reality becomes undeniable. That's why focusing on yourself isn't a motivational poster. It's the cleanest way to stop negotiating with other people's perception. Perception is slippery. People remember the version of you that benefited them. They label you based on one moment, not your full story. They build an opinion and protect it, even when you grow past it. So, if your peace depends on being understood, you'll always be at risk. Because you're asking the world to do something it's not built to do. Hold your full context with fairness. So you stop asking, not out of bitterness, out of discipline. You bring your attention back to the only place it produces real change, your daily life, your health, your craft, your money, your mind, your boundaries, your habits, the parts of you that become visible results over time. The parts no one can argue with once they exist. And this is where the shift becomes real. You stop trying to prove your value with words, and you start building evidence with repetition. You train your body until your confidence doesn't need compliments. You build your skill until you don't need constant recognition to feel valuable. You protect your time until your standards stop feeling like a fight and start feeling like normal life. You take your work seriously enough that distractions become expensive, not tempting. Slowly, the need to be understood starts to fade. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started respecting yourself. You stop writing long messages to people who already decided their story about you. You stop searching for closure in the mouths of people who don't have the honesty to give it. You stop chasing attention and calling it love. You stop performing. You stop auditioning. And something quiet happens. You get your energy back. That energy doesn't go into revenge. It goes into construction, into the kind of private work that changes your face before it changes your life. The kind of consistency that makes you calmer, harder to shake, harder to manipulate. Because when you're building, you're not available for every opinion. Your nervous system is no longer waiting to be chosen. You already chose yourself. This is why results are such a clean language. They don't argue, they don't explain, they don't beg, they simply exist. And when your life starts showing discipline, stability, and progress, people don't need a speech. They feel it, even the ones who never understood you. So let your life speak. Let your routine be your response. Let your standards be your explanation. Let your absence be the closure you were chasing, and keep focusing on yourself, not until you impress them, but until you no longer need them to validate what you already know. At some point, you realize the most exhausting part of your life wasn't the pain itself. It was the waiting for people to notice you without you saying anything, waiting for someone to finally show up in the exact way you imagined, waiting for the apology that would make the past feel fair, waiting for a signal that proves you matter. And it's not that you were wrong for wanting that. It's human, but it becomes a trap when your peace is scheduled around someone else's attention, because then your best hours get spent on things that don't build your future. Reading into silence, replaying conversations, interpreting mood shifts, hoping for closure from people who don't even have clarity in themselves. This is where the idea, "nobody cares," stops sounding like an insult and starts sounding like reality's clean edge. Not cold, just honest. People are living inside their own storms. Even the ones who love you have limits. Even the kind ones disappear sometimes. And once you accept that, you stop demanding a level of emotional availability that most humans can't consistently deliver. That acceptance doesn't make you smaller, it makes you lighter. Because the moment you stop performing for an invisible audience, you get something back that you didn't even realize you lost. Attention. And attention, when it comes back home, becomes fuel. You start noticing your own life again. Your body, your work, your standards. The small choices you've been postponing because your mind was parked in someone else's head. You begin to move differently, not with anger, with calm. You don't need to announce your growth. You don't need to argue your worth. You don't need to chase interpretations. You just build, quietly, repeatedly. And that's the most underrated kind of courage, choosing the slow path that nobody applauds at first. It's also the most stable kind of confidence. Not the confidence that comes from being liked, but the confidence that comes from evidence. You did what you said you would do, even when nobody noticed. You kept your word to yourself in private. You protected your focus. You respected your sleep. You showed up for your craft. And that proof becomes a foundation. It's hard to shake a person who knows, through repetition, that they can rely on themselves. That's the core of what we've been talking about in this episode. Not isolation, not bitterness, not pretending you don't care. It's a shift from outsourcing your stability to owning it. You still love people, but you don't hand them the remote control to your nervous system. You still want connection, but you stop paying for it with your self-respect. You still feel pain, but it doesn't get to define you. And maybe this is the quiet miracle. When you stop begging the world to care, you finally care properly for the one person who can't be replaced in your life, yourself. Not in a selfish way, in the most practical way, the way that makes tomorrow easier to live than today. So don't make this a dramatic vow. Don't turn it into a speech. Let it be small. Let it be real. Choose one action that respects you, one habit that moves you forward, one boundary that protects your energy. Then do it again and again until your life starts speaking in a language you don't have to translate. And here's the question I want to leave you with. Simple, but it changes everything if you answer it honestly. If you stopped waiting for anyone to care in the exact way you hoped, what would you start building starting tomorrow morning?